We've got a very special guest today on the Proof of Talent podcast, Will Burleson, head of talent at Scribe. Welcome to the podcast, man. How's everything going?
Happy to be here, guys. I know you guys have had some great guests, so excited to talk hiring and like kind of what's going on. Everything's good. I told you guys working on getting a house locked down, so just going through that stressful process, but all is well.
Yeah, the buying a house, I've done it once or twice, and it is never it's never easy ever. It's like a lot of things in crypto, so we'll dive into a lot of those. But so I think there's a couple different subjects today I definitely want to jump into, because you're somebody who I think has a really interesting grasp on like the crypto native side of the house. So we're definitely going to spend a lot of time on there, because I think we have a lot of people, especially in Twitter and things like that, that are from that, they're kind of cut from that cloth. But first, before we even hop into that, would love to hear how you got into your role right now at Scribe and what you're doing there.
Yeah, so I'll take it back even like a step further. So, I actually come from like military medicine. So I was in the Navy. And funny story, I actually shot like the first COVID radiograph in the Navy. I think, Rob, you're up in New York, so or that area. In 2020, when they sent like the hospital ship up there to relieve like the hospital system. Long story short, we ended up going up there to relieve like the trauma wards in the hospital system, but ended up bringing a COVID positive patient on board. So that was an interesting experience, but really just over time, like kind of lost like the passion for patient care and healthcare, and wanted to figure out, how to pivot into something else. So took that experience briefly into stints in corporate sales, first with like medical sales, and really got the start in recruiting through physician recruiting before going like full-time crypto at the beginning of 2022. Joined a recruiting firm called Up Top as like their first hire. So started out in agency recruiting, really took everything like 0 to 1 with them essentially, and saw like that whole journey. Enjoyed the time there. And I think like the biggest takeaway is it just gave me the opportunity to learn a lot of things like super quickly and really like expedite the process of like growing my network. And then, joined Scribe at the tail end of January 2024. Funnily enough, like they were one of my first clients back in agency recruiting. Placed a couple people on the team, met up with the Scribe guys and girls at a couple of the conferences, and then had dinner with Ashawn when he was in Dallas briefly. And then it just kind of snowballed from there. So I've only been in the role for like 6 months, but it's been a really, really cool opportunity to make the jump from agency to internal.
Quite the path going from medical to crypto. Have not heard too many people doing that. And you've obviously become like a huge player and community within the space. I guess what was the huge attraction for you joining crypto? Why'd you want to join this ecosystem?
Yeah, I think like secretly I'd always been like a nerd. So I always like played like video games in my spare time before I had, wife and kids, and before I spent all my time in crypto. And I felt like first and foremost, crypto, was the place to be. I grew up in the 90s, so saw like the whole inception of the internet and like how that changed everything. And I just got like the same feeling and sense that, crypto blockchain was going to have the same effect in the world. So I think that's what drew it to me. And, I stayed for like the people, and just, it's really a place where I can be like my authentic self. And I really appreciate and enjoy that.
Hey, it's funny. There's kind of some funny parallels too. The first person that joined our team, Colton, on our team, was briefly after college, he was a corrections officer in San Francisco, or in like San Mateo, and then went from a very like not the medical path, but like militaristic, I guess you could say, to then recruiting in tech, and then into crypto. It was funny because he got into recruiting by hearing people at the jail who were trading Monero in like 2017 and found crypto that way. So it's just funny to hear the unique paths that different people have when it comes to actually kind of like finding their way into this space.
Yeah, for sure. And I think like I got into around like the ICO boom in like 2017 as well, just from like a retail and like hobby standpoint. And like I said, I didn't really go like full time, like from like a career perspective until 2022. But yeah, one of the things that like drew me in as well, on top of like the tech, was just that it's a very like merit based, um, you know, ecosystem, and it's a lot more flat and not as hierarchical as like TradFi or corporate Web two.
Yeah, I mean, I think like obviously me and you have spent quite a lot of time at conferences and like very much so attract a lot of great people as well. I think that's definitely been like a huge part of just your success in the space is being a very genuine person. And
For
like
sure.
talent is such a unique vertical in the space to do that as well. I guess why were you interested in joining a recruiting agency and then continuing that path to be at Scribe?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure this will resonate with you guys or anybody in talent, but I don't think anybody gets into talent, or like you don't grow up wanting to be like a recruiter or wanting to be in talent. You kind of just like fall into it. Um, I wanted to combine like the what I was doing in physician recruiting. I enjoyed it. Um, I was at like um, a health tech startup recruiting firm. They had an adjacent platform called Doximity, and used
I
some of
know somebody who
the
worked in
data.
Doximity.
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
know a
So
couple
we used
people
some of
there. Yeah.
the data in metrics, and we leveraged that in the recruiting firm. And um, I liked it. I liked recruiting. I liked speaking with people, but ultimately, I just felt like another cog in the wheel. And what I did or didn't do didn't ultimately matter. And I don't feel like that here. I feel like every conversation or every opportunity to speak with somebody, I have the ability to make a huge impact, and I like that.
Yeah. It's funny. It's definitely a good point. I mean, I think for everybody, there's like, it's not a one size fits all, but I definitely resonate with that. Like my first job out of college, I worked in recruiting, and then I moved into software sales for a while. And I worked at a couple like big companies. I worked at NetSuite, and I worked at LinkedIn and Oracle.
You know?
And for me, like when I was, especially when after NetSuite, like NetSuite was already a big company. I think it was like 1,000, or it was probably close to 5,000 people at one point. Um, but like when it got acquired by Oracle, Oracle's like 100,000 people. And as a salesperson there, I'm like, okay, I have $1 million number, but like if I hit my $1 million number, like yeah, maybe I'm going to make some more money, but like it has zero impact on what happens with this company. Like it does not, like I do not matter whatsoever. Nothing I do here matters versus I just resonate, whether it's crypto or it's anything else. But for me, it's also crypto. But like working at a smaller company, like that just resonates with me a lot more because you do legitimately have impact versus even if you do something impactful for yourself, like at Oracle, it's not going to make a difference in the bottom line of a multi billion
100%.
dollar company.
Somebody else can do it. That's the
Yeah.
thing.
And they will.
Exactly. I think the other thing, the last thing on this is, I think like coming from like the military, being uh, told where to be, what to do, what to wear, what to eat, all that kind of thing, and going from that environment to like uh, crypto, where there's a lot of autonomy, and it's a remote first work environment. I definitely appreciate that aspect of it as well.
Definitely a lot of freedom in the space. It's actually insane how much travel opportunities are just like you said,
Yeah,
autonomy. Being a first hire at a recruiting agency, like
yeah,
doing that in Web two, probably not. I,
that is
I,
fun. Definitely not
yeah,
as fun.
yeah. And talk to us like what are you up to at Scribe? I know you joined in January. Big congrats. Would love to hear how things have been going and just the impact you're making over there.
Yeah. Well, I guess like for people who aren't familiar with like Scribe and who we are, what we do, so we're like a go-to-market studio, like full stack marketing agency for crypto, but more specifically like DeFi infrastructure, apps, and chains. So it could be anything from working with like a small early stage or pre-seed team, or seed stage team, all the way to working with like later stage apps and chains like Aptos, OP Labs, Able Labs. We're working with like Uniswap Foundation on like V4 and Uniswap X, like later stage, apps and chains, and new product pushes for them, and everything in between. Um, and yeah, like I said, I joined at the tail end of January, and if you had told me that the organization was going to double when I joined, I would have never believed you. So I joined around like 50 people, and I think now we're sitting just above 90 people. So um, yeah, it's just kind of crazy to think about like how much we've scaled and grown in a short amount of time. Um, so yeah, I can talk more about that, or if you guys have like a follow up question.
Yeah, no, for sure. And looking at like the growth there, because I think this is a challenge, or I think a consideration for a lot of people when they're thinking about taking that next step, and maybe the journey is a little bit different from a company to company basis. But what were some of the challenges associated with that growth over the past, since I guess over the past like six months to a year since you've joined?
Yeah. I think a lot of the early focus was like fleshing out issues around hiring and setting up a lot of the processes and framework on the back end. So when it was, time to go in hyperscale, when I joined these past few months, we were ready to do it across like, and as an organization as a whole. A lot of the things I was doing early on were conversations with hiring managers and really nailing down and figuring out like, what types of profiles are we looking for? What types of candidates are we looking for? And getting that kind of alignment and buy-in up front. Working with the founders to figure out like potential roadblocks and issues as well. And just a lot of like conversations and like reflection internally on like how I wanted hiring and talent at Scribe to look like and be perceived, through like the candidate lens. And I think like the other thing as well, like in this kind of market, and we'll talk more about like some of the marketing conditions later, but trying to compete with, candidates who are looking at protocols that can offer like, token or like that kind of like upside in equity. So really trying to like be very like intentional and thoughtful and creative in how we structure like conversations around like compensation with candidates and all the way from, initial conversation to closing. So I think that's definitely been, affected by the market conditions and the kind of like quote unquote bull market that we're in, even though it's kind of choppy right now. That's definitely something that we've had to battle against early on.
Definitely like understand that point you're making with hiring versus the big protocols. Definitely a big challenge for a lot of up and coming projects. You guys have obviously learned to differentiate yourselves. What's kind of been the key differentiator to not only attract the talent, but also land it at Scribe?
Yeah, I think like first and foremost, and I can't take any credit for this, but like having a very clear mission and vision is like one of the most important aspects of, finding aligned candidates. And like our mission at Scribe is to accelerate the growth of the crypto industry with integrity. And, our vision is to be the indispensable growth leader for, crypto's biggest projects from like incubation to end game. And I think by like being able to clearly like relay this to candidates from like the job description of a first conversation with me, really figures out like that type of alignment up front.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I think that's been important. And then I guess like, the other thing is from like a cultural perspective, like we're a global team of like 90 people now. So we're spread out all across the world, come from different like education, religion, parts of the world, so different cultures and everything like that. But what unites us is like the culture and like the operating principles and the values that we share. I think that's really important.
If I'm a job seeker right now, and like, let's say it doesn't have to necessarily be Scribe, but like I'm entertaining opportunities with a variety of companies, and maybe one is a larger protocol that's offering tokens, maybe another is a company like Scribe that does not have a token associated with it. Like, what are some considerations that like you might talk to somebody who is considering an opportunity at Scribe, or just like if you're putting yourself in their shoes, like, and they're thinking about those opportunities with these types of companies, like what should they be thinking about in a situation potentially like that?
Yeah. I mean, if you're joining like a later stage startup, I think you really need to understand if they're like, are you saying they're post like TGE?
Yeah, sure. It could be post TGE. It could be post, could be pre. I think just talking through those kind of like decision points.
Yeah. I think like ultimately it depends like, both short term and long term, like where you want to be in your career. I think if you're like wanting to join like a later stage like Apperchain and they have like a token or they're about to launch a token, I'm seeing a lot of people like index towards that in this like current market, opposed to like 22 or 2023 where people we're maybe more strapped for cash and like indexing or optimizing more towards like cash compensation. I think like, what I pitch when I talk to candidates is, and I made a Twitter post about this recently, is I really like agency because I feel like it gets you very close to the bleeding edge. The only way that you'd be closer is maybe through like VC or like being like a top angel in the space. Not only do you get to hear like what teams are doing, what kind of campaigns they're working on, what kind of emerging tech they're working on, you just like you're very in the trenches, and you get like a very unique broad exposure in agency that you wouldn't get perhaps doing ecosystem BD growth at like a protocol. So ultimately, I think you need to understand like the founders of both like the startup and the agency, and get really good glimpse into like who they are and where they want to take the organization. But it's also like you just kind of have to think about like where you want to be like a year or 5 years from now.
Yeah, I think going back to what you said about the differentiator for you guys is the mission, vision, values. Candidates have to be doing that same self-reflection within themselves coming into the space of just truly identifying what they're looking for. And I think, those that are skipping that step definitely can just experience, not the best experience, when joining a team if they're not doing that due diligence. So 100%. I think that's definitely a good point to highlight because there's so much noise, I think, right now compared to 2022, 2023, seeing so many people raising capital. Mm-hmm. What are your thoughts on that?
For what specifically?
Just like that kind of like a self-reflection piece. Is that something you see a lot of candidates like taking the time to implement, or?
I think it depends. I think like right now, in terms of like scaling Scribe and conversations around, how we've grown over the past year and a half, 2 years is, we are completely like bootstrapped. We've never taken VC funding. All the resources have gone back into the organization. And I tell people this because, when I tell somebody on a call, like, hey, I joined in January, we were 50 people, now we're 90 people, somebody could be like very like weary, or like that could raise some like, yellow or orange flags, right? That we've scaled so quickly when the market's gone up. But what I go and point to is like I said, like we've never taken VC funding. All the resources are invested back in the organization, whether that be for like hiring or whether that be for like training development. Mm-hmm. And Scribe was built during like the 2022, 2023 like bear market. And I think that gives us a very unique strategic sense on like how to grow and scale an organization for long term, not just to go with like bull and bear cycles and like overhiring and stuff like that. And usually when I point to that and explain like, hey, this is how we've grown over the past 2 years, people feel a lot more at ease, and it resonates with that because a lot of people have been, laid off, during 2022 and 2023, and kind of makes them like averse to, either continuing or restarting their career in crypto.
One of the topics I definitely want to dive into is kind of the subject around hiring crypto native talent, as well as if you are a crypto native individual, like how you can find the best opportunity for you. But I want to preface it even like, how would you describe crypto native talent in general?
Ooh, that's a good one. I actually think so how we define crypto native talent at Scribe is very different to maybe how other teams, and I think a fair amount of teams actually approach this in the wrong way. I feel like some organizations are, just hiring crypto natives just for the sake of it. And, to a certain extent, in some scenarios, it almost feels like it's like kind of like gatekeeping. I think the right way to go about hiring crypto natives for your organization is figuring out like what crypto native means and why. For example, at Scribe, like when I pitch and when I talk to candidates in the initial call, I think can define it in like 3 different ways. One, from the tech perspective, you understand some of the underlying tech and some of the things going on underneath the hood being built. 2, from like a cultural perspective, you understand like crypto culture and CT culture. You're an active participant there. And 3, from like a value alignment standpoint, like you believe in the ethos of the space and like why we're all here building. And now there are some like exceptions for like, roles across the organization for like maybe like PR or design. Like the minimum threshold is like crypto literate or crypto curious. But going back to it, I think it's really important that teams define this up front and like really also be like clear and honest about it to candidates. Yeah. And then what was the other part of the question?
That was the majority of the question on that front.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, but I mean, even I guess kind of going a little bit beyond that too. Thinking about that, I guess, into maybe another level deeper, like when somebody is looking to hire a crypto native individual, are there any specific roles where you've seen that type of roles, like where you've seen that go really well, or it doesn't have to be specific examples, but like any types of roles that you've seen people really should be maybe thinking about at least hiring crypto native talent, or sometimes where, like you said, hey, maybe focusing on crypto native talent is a little bit gatekeepy and you should be thinking maybe a little bit beyond the bubble as well?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know, like, I think like CT was debating this back in like April or May timeframe. There's a lot of back and forth around like Web 2 versus like, crypto natives. Like, first and foremost, I do believe like it's very situational and there is a lot of nuance to it. If I was to point to like a specific example, let's say you're hiring for a BD role. Maybe not like a head of BD or manager level, but maybe more junior to mid level. I think if you're a team, you have to think about, would you rather have somebody who's native, comes with a established network, they understand like how to build relationships in the space. They're maybe like terminally online and like in these like group chats and conversations, versus somebody who's following the industry for a while, maybe coming from Web 2 tech or startups or some other type of background. And you go through like the process with like candidate B who's not native to the space, and you get the signal that they're going to give everything to seize this opportunity, and they're going to hustle hard and they're super motivated. I feel like you're kind of at a crossroad, like to make a decision. And that's why I think it's very specific to the role and where that organization is at as well, and what that specific team looks like. In the second part of your question, in terms of roles, it's a tough one. I know there's a lot of debate, like I said, on CT about like crypto natives versus like Web 2 marketers. If I had to give like two or three, I would say like social would probably be pretty high up on the list. I think to keep up to date with like current trends and memes and opportunities to grow your brand through social media, through like virality and like natural content, you kind of have to be like terminally online and have like a real finger on the pulse. So that one stands out to me. And I know that's like our strategy for hiring social media managers at Scribe. Community would probably be pretty high up on the list as well. I think you have to really understand like crypto community building and how it relates to like, Web3 or DeFi centric communities. A lot of projects we've seen, UI, I've seen an agency over the past, couple of years have tried to capitalize on hype or like inorganic growth. And I think from like what we've seen like play out, it's not sustainable. So I think getting somebody who really understands the culture and how to take like a community from 0 to 1, or other like community initiatives or activations, and can figure out like how to align incentives between the team and the community itself. And it's best served by probably somebody who's native to the space to figure all that out. And then like probably like BD, I think for like senior ahead of BD profile type people, like you want to hire somebody who's pretty like plugged into the industry. I saw actually, I think Seraphin from Athena, he tweeted a couple weeks back and said something along the line. I'm going to butcher it, I'm sorry, but it was something along the lines of like, good BD isn't for strategy. It's to be like a call or text away from somebody important, and like a good network equals speed, and like you can beat your competition that way. I kind of butchered it. You get the point.
Yeah, no, I think all those roles 100%. Like, I think it was a month or two ago as well, people were tweeting about just the difficulty of hiring and finding crypto native community managers. Definitely not a lot out there that are like exceeding expectations, because it's not an easy role to build those up. But it's been interesting as well too. Like obviously being at the recruiting agency, you work with such a variety of clients, and it does come down to the goals too. Like I'd say on the technical side, like probably the majority you have to be very crypto native for engineering, but you do have those teams that might be in media, might be in the L1 space that are like, hey, we want some Web 2 devs building these specific products that have more traditional experience. Have you like, is that something that you've seen quite a bit as well with Scribe?
On the engineering side, I mean, we're not working on or doing anything like technical at the moment. But I think if I were to, go back to agency, 6+ months ago and pinpoint there, I mean, obviously it can make sense if you're like, a Solidity engineer, or you're doing like backend infrastructure and you have to understand like how to connect some of these things. Like I get like the crypto native like requirement there. That makes a lot of sense. But if you're just like a full stack or like front end developer, like and you're building out, the whole front end of the stack or for the protocol, like, I mean, maybe I'm ignorant, but I don't think you have to be like a complete degen or crypto native to do that. And I think like opening the parameters a bit would give us access to a bit more talent on the technical side of things.
Yeah, I think it's a solid point, and I would definitely agree with it. I think it's a nuanced discussion. I think there are certain roles too, like you said, where it's like absolutely critical, and I think there's some people too that when they're in high impact positions, like it just really kind of takes things to another level, and they're just able to do much more like with what they like. I'm even thinking there's I think it was a tweet the other day. It was just an intern who was at CMS, now at Monad, and I think you know a bunch of the Monad team, but he was talking about how they've like built their community from basically like the ground up, and I think that's one thing too, where like you have these people in the space that I think like innovate and kind of set trends. And if you're able to hire like everybody now wants that like Gmonad strategy and like all that type of stuff. And you're probably not going to get that if you hire somebody from outside the industry who has like no idea maybe like what clicks within it. And so I think like that type of innovation is really cool and interesting to see. But one of the things that I think that's kind of, and even like thinking about intern and there's people just like that in general. So if you are somebody who, let's say you are like a crypto native, or you are terminally online, you are a crypto person, like I'm terminally online myself as well, but like you are terminally online, but you don't work full-time in crypto yet. You want to work full-time in crypto. Like what can you do as an individual to maybe get your foot in the door, if that is the goal that you eventually have, is being full-time employed and terminally online in the crypto space?
Yeah. This might sound crazy, but I do think like being active and being an active participant on crypto Twitter is probably the most plus AV thing you can do as like a starting point. And then from there, it's just like growing your brand and reputation, your skills. Like, what are you known for, right? And figuring out like a team or community that aligns with like your interests, and going there and like showing, hey, like I can do the work up front. And I've seen so many success stories from people just DM sliding a founder on Twitter and just saying, hey, like really like what you're building here. This is what I can do. And like they end up getting hired. I think I spoke with like a lot of candidates in like 2022, 2023 who were like coming from Web 2 and like, tangentially involved in the space, and they struggled to find their feet in what they continue to do. And I saw two very specific instances of this. One was a DevRel, this guy named Jason, and he ended up joining the Ethereum Foundation and getting hired there on their team at the start of 2024. And like through the majority of 2022 and 2023, he was competing in hackathons. He was just like heads down building his skills. The second one is Danny over on the Monad team, and everything he's done with like the pipeline, the podcast, and like the whole growth and ecosystem strategy he's been building over there. I spoke with Danny way before he joined Monad as a candidate back in agency, and he found the Monad team, he found the community, he got involved, he showed his like value proposition, and they ended up hiring him. So I think those are like two great examples, and like it's very easy to say this this is, hey, what you need to do. But actually getting out there and doing it and executing it, it takes a lot of work and a lot of time.
Biggest thing I heard out of that too is just taking action. I think that's the number one thing, is being a self-starter in the space. It's not going to come to you. You have to go and get it. That's for a lot of people too. Even if you're at a role in the space, like, you got to be very active, reaching out to these companies and trying to create deals, partnerships, communities. So definitely agree with that. I guess, like, what's kind of the biggest challenges hiring crypto native talent?
I think like one of the biggest challenges is, putting them into position to succeed and figuring out, like, does this person even need to be like crypto native in the first place? I think like being able to like, attract crypto native talent is a whole like, nuance in itself. I think you have to have like the right product, the right vision, the right branding, the right communication that like speaks to those different groups of people. And ultimately, at the end of the day, if you're a DGen and you're out there making 8-9 figures just trading on your own, then like, why would you want to join some company for $100K a year when you're doing way better on your own? So figure out like incentive alignment there when it comes to like equity and really getting them bought into like what you're building. I think that's like super important. And that starts with like the founder and how they communicate things ultimately.
One of the things too, I think you said earlier, just in regards to kind of being a self-starter, I think is super important, especially when you're trying to like stand out. So I think there's some roles, kind of like you indicated before, where like if you're an engineer
100%.
and you have a fairly well-developed GitHub profile, and whether you're like crypto native or not, most companies will take a look at that GitHub profile and be like, all right, this person can work. Like, obviously we're going to interview them, go down, that rabbit hole. But if you are not that person, like, you could be a like phenomenal thinker in the crypto space, but have the most random job in some type of other industry. And that does not align, and your resume looks like somebody might look at your resume and be like, all right, like what the hell is this person doing applying for this role? And so I think like in those instances, like, you could be the best fit for the position, but going out and like putting in that groundwork and doing it repeatedly, I think is like the most important thing. And I would agree with you. I've seen that kind of over and over in a variety of situations where it's something as it's been a ton of different things, but it's something as simple as somebody like going out and taking notes on a podcast or writing Twitter threads about certain things, like the content and networking, creating a specific Telegram group for something, like all those types of things where you're kind of just going out and doing things for free, but just doing things because you love doing them and you like the opportunity that you're trying to give yourself. That to me feels like such a value add, where it's like you're not necessarily going to get hired on day one doing this, but like 3 months, 6 months down the road, maybe a year down the road, like you might have a totally different life because you took the time to do that.
Spot on. I think like building on what you said as well, it's like, it's important when you come in, like the mindset when you come in to do something like this, like you're not solely doing it just to get a job, right?
Yeah.
Like you're doing it because you want to do it, you want to contribute, you want to be here, and like it's something you love doing. Like if you go into it in the mindset like, hey, I'm gonna like join this community, I'm gonna like do BD for them for 2 months, and then they're gonna hire me, like you're gonna fail. Yeah. Like it's just not gonna work out.
Yeah, you got to do it for the love of the game for sure. I feel like otherwise people see through it in crypto.
That's big facts.
Yeah, the transaction is big red flag. We've seen it time and time again. Those people are just not as successful as others that are just genuine and authentic. But yeah, kind of like transitioning as well too. Like one of the topics I want to touch on as well is like finding talent on different mediums. Would love to hear more about kind of your sourcing strategy and like where to find some of the best talent in Web3.
Yeah. Slightly maybe contrarian answer here, but I think like the harsh truth is like a lot of the top percentage of talent like probably doesn't want to be found for the most part. And that's why I think like if you're in crypto, like one of the most important things is to have a really strong network in the space. And I think this is like the key to unlocking a lot of doors and conversations. And then outside of that, like having like the personal brand. So when that person does come come like potentially knocking, they know that they can trust you, and like, you know, you have their best interest in mind. I mean, I use like Discord, not for recruiting, but for like network effect purposes, like I joining like alpha groups and being really close to like what's happening in like DeFi and like some of the innovation taking place there. And like that translates over into like conversations with like some of those candidates that I try and engage. But I wouldn't like join like a Discord and like try and recruit somebody like for a role on a one-to-one basis like that. That's just not going to work out. You're better served using, you know, LinkedIn or probably Twitter in that instance. But it's a great tool for like building your network and meeting like-minded individuals. You know, like I said, I depending on like what role it is, like I'll frequently message like people on Twitter, like if it's for a more like crypto native role, like social content or community. And I think like the other medium, like the biggest one for me is just like the power of like content creation. It's opened so many doors for me. And I haven't done it as consistent as I should, if I'm being honest. And I haven't done it for very long, but you know, it's like I said, it's opened so many doors for me in terms of like engaging and speaking with candidates or founders or teams looking to hire, and just like dropping a note and saying, hey, really appreciate like what you're doing here. And I've even hired, you know, a handful of people who have just like slid in my DMs after like put out some like posts around hiring. So I think like content is in like personal brand, as generic as that may seem, it's a huge edge for me.
Yeah, it's a good point. I think recruiting in general, I think probably even outside of like the crypto space right now, I feel like is getting more challenging, not less over time, just because everybody for the most part has the access to the same tools, and automation is so easy now, so that like if you are a job seeker, or not even a job seeker, like if you're just somebody who has a LinkedIn profile, like you're getting overwhelmed constantly. And so to be able to stand out from the crowd, and I think like you said, like the key thing is when somebody is looking, you have the branding and you know the name brand recognition that they think of, like, hey, you know, I want a new job, who am I going to reach out to? And so I think like that's a really big advantage for sure, that to me like makes your life a lot easier when you're able to get that type of inbound inbound flow versus just having to rely on, you know, external sources.
Yeah, for sure. No, I think like you said, like that like trust and that like kind of like proof of work or like social consensus that, and I mean it's I don't have like a crazy following on Twitter, but I actively post and I try like and be thoughtful and, you know, on a weekly basis put out some sort of you know, tweet around hiring. And like it like I said, it just goes back to like building trust with those individuals.
Trust, credibility, especially like the market insight. Being in talent, we have such a like much different perspective than most candidates, because we're looking at so many different verticals and projects. So I think, yeah, you've done an excellent job doing that. I've probably taken the more LinkedIn route. But it is super like beneficial to build that personal brand, and like based off the content you post, you'll attract like-minded people that are in tune with like what you're doing. So, and with, go ahead.
I have people like all the time just like message me on Telegram or on Twitter, and we just have conversations around like, you know, their interview process, and they ask me what they feel like is maybe like a stupid question, but like if you don't know, you don't know, and like no question is dumb. And I enjoy helping people, you know, through negotiating comp and doing all this kind of stuff. And I just really enjoy like that non-transactional aspect of like recruiting as well. And like it always comes back, right? Like these people then, you know, a couple months down the line, they either hit me up to help them with hiring, or they have like a friend they want to intro to me. So like doing a good deed in the space, it always comes back.
As we're kind of coming to the end of the conversation here a little bit, you mentioned it like way in the beginning, but kind of we're at this like weird place in the market right now where, you know, you obviously have Bitcoin has been, you know, ripped over the past year, and I've like sitting at 60K. But for somebody who's terminally online like myself and yourself, probably, you see crypto Twitter and can be like a weird doom and gloomy type situation. like what are your general, it doesn't have to necessarily be like market asset price thoughts, but like what are your kind of thoughts on where we are right now, and like what's the vibe you're getting, whether it's within Scribe or just like externally working with these companies or just from Twitter?
Yeah. I mean, like I said, like the market is just been like very sideways and kind of like choppy. I'm not gonna try and like embarrass myself and give like any like predictions around like where I see things going. Um, but I think like previous cycles we have been waiting for like uh institutional buyers and like these big institutional players to come in, and like we're seeing that with like the ETFs. So I mean, I'm personally like long term very bullish. I think through like the lens of a candidate. Um, if I was just hired or just changed into a new role at the start of the year, I'd be very intentional in like how I'm thinking about like career, both like long term and short term. Um, we've seen that like over time, like history repeats itself, and like this industry has uh, been proven to be like pretty cyclical, and teams sometimes overhire or whatever
Yeah.
like the circumstances may be. So I would be very thoughtful in like terms of like how I'm developing like my soft skills, my hard skills, my network, my knowledge, and all kind of everything under that umbrella. Because if things were to take a downturn and like there were layoffs, what's different from you and the hundreds of other people who just got a job 6 months ago?
Mm.
So that's something that I would be very like thoughtful against. And I'm not being like doom and gloom and saying like, hey, like 2025 is going to be a bear market or whatever, but like always being proactive and thinking like what's coming next, and like projecting your career out that way. Pretty important.
Definitely been a very interesting year in the market.
Yeah.
Um, Q2 seemed like it was booming with like new jobs entering the market. Things, I'm not sure if things have slowed down yet. I think Q3 will definitely be very telling for kind of the direction of the space, but definitely agree on like the institutional aspect. And still, I think we're still waiting on that next narrative as well. That's like really
To
going to
watch on
bring
too.
on,
Yeah.
yeah.
I agree. I agree. A lot of like, I think for myself, like you guys have seen this through like Q1 and maybe like probably Q2 for the majority, is everybody wants to hire social marketing content roles. And that's made my life very hard. But we've gone and looked at like market research and really been, like I said, trying to be very creative and thoughtful into how we approach these conversations with candidates, around like compensation. Because like I said, we don't have, I don't think we have a native token and no plans to launch one. So battling against that has been tough. But yeah, like I'll be curious to see if we continue just to keep this momentum going into, 2025. I think the election will probably play a pretty big role in terms of like the macro outlook as well, which obviously will dictate where we kind of go.
Yeah, it's truly Satoshi's vision for us to be giving a shit about the United States election and the macro environment, but here we are. Any final thoughts as far as just some of the subjects we discussed? Anything you want to to leave the people with as we head out in a bit here?
I think in terms of just general market, I think like during a bear market you see like a lot of focus from like builders and VCs on like the infrastructure side, and like during like this kind of market, it shifts more towards like consumer and apps and dApps. And I will be curious to see for the rest of the year and going into 2025, like if there's like any clear winners or anybody that can take like attention and like kind of market share,
Mm.
because I think that will be like a narrative that we can latch onto. And then not to get like too deep into it, but I think like in terms of like a role specific, following like DevRel pretty closely and like how that's continuing to evolve. I think there's a very like, and this is, I think there was a debate on Twitter the other week around this, and there's just like a very undefined, scope of like what is DevRel and like how to do DevRel for a team. So that's something that I'm keeping like pretty close tabs on. We'll be curious to see how that continues to evolve.
Very small market too for like good DevRels in the space. That was,
Yes.
I think last year that was like such a huge need. Like you said, now it's like definitely the content marketing side, which is awesome. Um, But yeah, I just wanted to thank you for coming on the pod. Like, it's been really cool to see your journey in crypto, and now see have talent at Scribe, doubling team size. Like, very excited for your journey, man.
No, I appreciate it, bro. It's been great being here. You guys have had some great guests, and definitely enjoyed it. And yeah, I'd be curious to see like where the rest of the year takes us for sure.
It's only one way to find out. It's stick around. So thanks so much for coming on the pod. Appreciate it.
Thanks, guys. Appreciate you.